Today, I'm going to be talking about 12 habits of highly secured Magento merchants. I've been with Nexus for 5 years now. I just noticed I'm wearing the same shirt. Sorry. This is my fancy shirt, so please excuse me. I've been at Nexus for 5 years. In that time, I've worked with merchants of all different sizes. You really get a good understanding of what merchants are asking for. They're pretty common questions, concerns about not only security, performance, how to best manage their business at times. They're looking for a little bit of insight. And so I think I've been able to fit in my role pretty well at Nexus, simply because I come from a small business background. My parents are small business owners. I would come from a long line of small business owners. Maybe with a show of hands, can anybody who owns or works at a small business raise their hand? I know I do. So yeah, you guys know. A lot of times you're wearing multiple hats. You're having to worry about how you're going to pay the bills, how you're going to pay your employees, and in this case, how you're going to secure your business. So when I was a kid, we used to work at the family business. Essentially, it was your neighborhood store. You could see here that it was literally a historical landmark because it was the last commercial business in a residential neighborhood. So all of our neighbors were literally homeowners and working class people that lived right around who knew us personally. And our family being so small, the best way they knew how to secure their business was by putting their kids in front of the cash register and managing the money. It was never hire an outside employee. It was never bring in other family members. It was plop your 13-year-old kid in front of the cash register and teach them how to do basic math. So I could tell you, as a 13-year-old, the sound of a quarter once it hit the counter. So my parents didn't really know much about securing a business. There were never any cameras in the place. When we finally sold the business, I was 20-something years old. I found out that the security system they had in place wasn't actually a security system. I would walk in every morning, punch the code in the system, and find out that the beeping that would go off when I opened the door was just a beep. It wasn't actually going anywhere or sounding any alarm. So realizing that, I was kind of freaked out, but they put a lot of risk in that. And there were times where, as a young adolescent, I would leave the business pretty quickly to go hang out with my friends, go play basketball. I loved playing basketball as a kid. To my father coming in the next day, finding out that the door was unlocked. And the business essentially being wide open for anybody to walk in. And again, it wasn't the most secure setting, but we knew the neighbors. We had a very secured feeling when we were running our business. Of course, I got an earful and was punished pretty good when I was a kid. But there were some risky moments, and I feel like merchants are doing that today. Merchants are assuming that they are living in a secured world. They're assuming that they have nothing to worry about really when it comes to their site, their business being at risk, because who am I as a small business owner? Who really cares about the few 100 merchants that come to my site every day or every week? Why are they going to try and take their credit card information? But I'm here to tell you that it is a real risk, and maybe we can go through some of the things that I've learned that I've helped our merchants really understand in terms of building a more secured website. So recent articles have been coming out about Magento, not only Magento 1 or Magento 2, but also Magento 1. And I think this is important to note that whether you're running Magento or any other e-commerce application, it is your responsibility. We're going to talk about PCI Compliance a little bit. I'm going to go over some basic practices that are listed in PCI, but this really matters in that you guys have to take responsibility as small business owners about the security of your business. So one way that you can start I took this article from Piotr Kaminsky, who gave a talk yesterday on a panel discussion about security. In order for you to really be secured, you got to work with the right partners. So let's start with you as a business. You get an assessment of what you're responsible for, understanding what your business is capable of doing, and what your role is as the business owner to secure it. So we talk about scope a lot, and when you're taking a look at any of the PCI or security reports, they all talk about scope. What is your responsibility? What is your hosting provider's responsibility? And what is your developer's responsibility? And these are the three main areas where you're going to look at, and in a lot of ways, it's a joint effort. And it's your job to make sure that you're working with your partners, and they're going to educate you on what their responsibilities are and how they're going to help you. But it's also going to be pretty eye-opening in terms of what your job is. So again, it's 100% self-governed. Working with your team members is really going to help. A security leak isn't something that, the hosting provider is going to have to worry about that, or a security leak is going to be on the developer to patch. And assessing your business up front and early on is going to be important. I'll tell you a quick story. When I was a freshman in high school, I tried to see what I could do better, what I can do to assess my situation as a freshman. And in one of my classes, I went to my guidance counselor, and I pretty much said, hey, I just took my last final on my last class on the last day. What can I do to improve my grade? And he turned to me and said, can you repeat that? I said, what can I do? I just finished up my last final on my last day of class, and he said, you can't do anything at this point. And it was kind of funny for him because I took the time to assess where I was at as a student. I took the time to assess my situation, but it was too late. And for small business merchants, assessing early on and not after you've been hacked or not after there's been some compromise in your business is incredibly critical. So let's get into it, I guess. How do you protect yourself? How do you protect your business? What can you do? And the very first thing I explain to merchants is build a strategy, build a framework for your business, build a documentation, a policy for how you are going to address security issues, how you are going to hire new employees, what's the process for that, how you're going to treat data after your employees leave your business. It's all essential in really building a security strategy. And once you have the policies in place, the documentation will always come. One of the first things we recommend is building a diagram, and that's going to help with your scope. When you're building your scope, it's build a diagram. Where are my servers housed? How am I accessing those servers? What networks am I using to really access those servers? And that's going to help you to outline how you're going to build your policy and your framework. So like I said, and I have to apologize because a lot of this is going to be revolved around PCI. And typically when you put the title PCI Compliance in a presentation subject line, not a lot of people show up. So thanks all for showing up. The PCI really means Payment Card Industry Data Security Standards. So the PCI DSS, this may be something that you commonly hear. And essentially, it's a group or the coming together of these companies, Visa, MasterCard, American Express, and the others, to really say, here's the standards required for businesses that accept credit card. And that's both online and offline businesses. That's going to mean whether you're a small business that has a POS system, a credit card machine like my family did, or you're an online business or a multinational corporation that has thousands of not only stores but locations throughout the world that are accessing credit card information or processing credit card information. One of the ways that you can get good guidance is through the PCI Compliance Standards Report. This is pretty much a report that's issued every year. Right now we're on PCI standard version. You can see right here on the bottom 3.1. You see on the right where I highlighted in red, it's actually very helpful information. This is what the compliance rules are. This is exactly what they recommend or offer some information on. Here's why you need to protect information, or here's some steps you can do. So I strongly encourage you, and I have a link at the end of the presentation that actually will direct you to this information. So let's start with habit number one. So habit number one is firewall protection. That's number one recommendation. That's the number one item that you'll see when you're looking through a PCI report, is having a protected firewall. And what does that really mean, to have a firewall? That means a firewall not only on your network at home, at your office, but also with your hosting provider. And typically any hosting company, established hosting company that claims PCI compliance, that claims that they have a certain level of security, will, number one, have a firewall in place. And that could be either a hardware firewall, actual server firewall, or web application firewall or software firewall in place. And what does the firewall actually do? The few points there: it blocks outside traffic from coming into the network, and mainly it restricts traffic, both in and going out in a lot of cases. And then the web application firewall, which is the bare minimum requirement for security, even if a hardware firewall isn't in place, is something that is actually closest to your network. This is where you'll be able to set rules and enable rule sets that protect Magento or your e-commerce application from malicious activity, and that's where you have a little bit more control. And again, it allows for monitoring services. But to give you an example, so your router at home or your developer, if they work remote, one of the requirements is having a firewall in place. Typically when you work with, I don't know who the major cable providers are. We work with Comcast or AT&T that provide your internet services. They issue you a router that you rent. That typically is enough for you to meet the minimum compliance, because that router is built into, has a firewall built into it. Number two, and it seems really basic, is password hygiene. I think I read an article recently that said about 60% of Americans are still using their same password for the last 5 years on their Gmail account. How many people have had same password for their email account for more than 90 days? Me too. It's basic information, and it's difficult because we have so many passwords these days that we begin to use the same password in multiple accounts. How many people do that? I do that. My Facebook account has the same password as my email account. And I learned through this process that I need to stop doing that. So one thing that you could do is consider using a password wallet. We're really big at Nexus in using LastPass. There's a few others, but LastPass seems to be work very well. There's a free version. There's a paid subscription version. I love the paid subscription. It's like $12 a year. I'm not here to sell it, but it really does amazing stuff. And that you have one password, and then for every individual account that you have, you set up a unique, or you generate a unique password that meets the minimum requirements, or the the best practices, the alphanumeric, lowercase, capital letters, and so forth. And you can make it as complex as you want. Making sure that you have passwords on all levels of your application, on your wireless network or wired network, on all server applications and personal computers and devices. And that's the most important. One of the other things that we encourage with passwords is two-factor authentication, and I'll talk about that a little bit. So habit number 3 would be data retention policy. Real quick, how many have a data retention policy somewhere documented in your company handbook or somewhere in your company? This is what we do with data. Doesn't have to be credit card data. It's any sort of sensitive information. Nobody. Oh, we got one. And maybe another. Essentially is, what are you doing with that information? Ask yourself a few questions first. How are you securing and storing and eventually destroying that data that may be needed? What type of data do you really need to collect? Determining that, is it password information? Is there a password portal? Username information? And ultimately, is it credit card information that's passing through your business? And if so, how long are you holding it? Is it being secured? And again, how are you handling it in general? Managing sensitive data is also, we're going to ask you to place data into a directory that isn't web accessible. So I ran into this the other day where I was helping one of my colleagues and she pulled up a password on a text file. Who here has their password saved in a folder on a text file that they could just pull up, copy and paste real quick? Or a sticky note on their monitor. That's the worst, when you have it on their monitor like that. And this doesn't normally happen with businesses, but you say, hey, I want to get a PCI audit and I want to bring a third-party company. We use Brightline. Hey, Brightline, come to my business and sit in my conference room and start going through the PCI security standards and report and start auditing my business. And they walk into your office and see a sticky note with a password. You automatically fail. They'll walk out and say, we'll schedule another one in the next 6 months. So be careful about where you store your passwords. So how many here have heard of the term tokenization? How many understand what tokenization means? Essentially, tokenization is substituting the sensitive information. And what's most critical to understand about tokenization is as that information, the credit card data information that is being sent to the payment gateway provider is being encrypted. And what's important to remember here is that it's almost impossible to de-encrypt that information back to the original credit card information. And that's why it's incredibly secured. And tokenization allows for recurring payments. People will come back who already have their information saved. That's the biggest appeal for tokenization. But I think the security piece is definitely, you can send off credit card info and be very happy or safe to know that it can't be decrypted. What type of information is credit cards and credit card numbers that are considered sensitive information is the entire 15 or 16-digit numbers. The last 4 digits are not considered sensitive information. So when you're logging into your Amazon account and you see the last 4 digits of your information, it's not sensitive info. And one of the most common questions we get asked when we're doing presentations like this is, I want to save credit card information. I want to actually have the person's credit card on file when they do come back. How do I do that as a business? And typically we tell them, don't do that. And the short answer is because you're going to have to build a custom solution. It's something that you're building outside of Magento, and you're going to have to go one by one through a 155-page document to work with the PCI auditors to demonstrate to them that this is how I've secured every point of contact and every bit of information so that I can have that credit card information saved. Other technologies have made it much easier. If you're working with Magento has now made it much easier where, Travis, you now know that information isn't passing through Magento at all at this point. One of the other things that I was surprised to know is that not many people know much about SSLs. I encourage, and I see him here, but I encourage you guys to check out the YouTube video by Talesh Siparsa. On YouTube, he's got a great article or a great piece on SSLs, why and why not you need SSLs. But typically, and you'll now notice that Google is now searching for all websites that have SSL certificates, and if your site isn't secured or up to date with the proper SSL, there'll be the big X or the little X over in the web browser. But the common SSLs that you'll look at are domain validation, business validation, extended validation SSL certificates. Now, what does that mean? It essentially means what information are you presenting? Does a domain validation essentially you are providing your domain name and you are verifying that, yes, I do own this domain. With the business and the extended validation, you are vetting your company a little further. You're actually providing more information. How many people know what an EVSSL is? Only a couple, 3, 4. EVSSL is actually your extended validation. This is the SSL that gives you the green bar that you see there where it says secure. The green bar, you typically see it on banking institutions, credit card companies, but as a merchant, you can also have that same green bar. You can have the same secure feeling for your merchants or your customers with that green bar, but it's going to require some additional vetting. They want to know, is your business registered? Is your business, when I say registered by a government body? Are you LLC? Are you Inc? Are you some other form of registered company? But they want to vet that information. They want to find an online public directory, and it requires some effort, some paperwork on your part to really prove that I am a well-established, reputable company here in the United States, and even globally, they'll ask for specific information in relation to your place of business. But some of the major providers you can see there, but one thing to note is that the EVSSL certificate, it's not any more secure than a domain level validation SSL certificate. It's the same encryption process or the same encryption from your site to the end user or from the end user to the certificate authority. The difference is how much information are you providing about your company to the merchant who decides to click on that green bar to learn more about your company. Essentially, so that if there is an issue, they can click on the green bar and call you directly. One good way is we use at Nexus when we're checking SSLs or the support staff needs to check SSLs is using SSL Labs. Essentially, and I did quick Magento.com to see if you guys are good. You are, A rating. Essentially, it checks your web browser when you're doing the search. It checks the server environment that you're on, and it runs through a long list. This is only a small top snippet. It's actually a very long report. It takes a few minutes to deliver the report to you, but it's very helpful. And more often than not, you can take this information back to your SSL provider, who, in the event that you're running on an old encryption using SHA-1 encryption, you can take that information and say, here, I need you to regenerate my SSL because it's old and it doesn't follow the new SHA 256 encryptions that are now mandatory. That probably doesn't mean much to most, but just being able to really assess what your grade is going to help you tremendously. Number 5, protect against malware. That seems pretty simple. We are a Linux-based company. We're almost 100% Linux-based, so it was difficult for me to find information about protecting Linux from malware or using a malware software or some sort of antivirus protection, because it very rarely do you have it happen. So the focus here is definitely on your home office. This was actually pulled straight from the Nexus PCI security training that we all go through at Nexus. Essentially, it was information on how we as employees, as individuals, must have our laptops secured. And that means laptops, mobile devices, tablets, anything that you are logging into the Magento admin panel, anything that you're using to access your company account. I would say, even whether you're using credit card or accessing credit card information or not, this is just good common sense. Stay up to date on security updates. Right now with Magento 2, the best place to go is Magento Security Center. If you haven't already or don't know anything about it, the Magento Security Alert Registry, it's essentially an email list, and they will email you directly anytime a new security patch is released. They will email you when they have a new update. Magento 2.0.4 is now the latest version. How many saw that there were two updates last week, or last week and the week before? Good, 1, 2. Essentially, Magento went from 2.0.3 to 2.0.4 in a matter of 2 weeks. And if you weren't paying attention or you didn't get an email, all of a sudden your site is not secured or secured to the best of your ability, right? One of the old ones that we used, and I think I tried reaching out to the folks, is Majorport. If you're still running on Magento 1, you can go to majorport.com, plug in your URL, your domain, and it'll essentially run through a list of here's all the security patches in place for Magento 1, and your site is either secured or missing a few patches, and that's the information that you can copy and paste and send to your developer, send to your partner agency that'll help to make sure that they get the proper patches in place. I just had a conversation with a developer yesterday. They were working on a merchant that was running on 1.0.3, like incredibly old Magento. Like they didn't know how to upgrade. The client went to a developer to try and upgrade. So if you guys hang back far enough that they're not going to know how to approach your business. They're not going to know how to update your Magento site. They're essentially going to tell you, we will now charge you a new Magento build, which will be $20, $30 or more, $1,000. So consider this as a tool that's going to save you some money in the long run. There's an image of Majorport. I just ran one of our clients who's running on an old Magento 1 Enterprise, restrict access. At Nexus, we have a documented an access policy. So me, on the sales side, I do not have access to the data center in our building, which is pretty frustrating when I first encountered it, because I tried going on a tour and giving a client a tour and found out, wait a minute, I don't have access to this room anymore, and I had to go find support staff. So I've been at the company 5 years, and again, I'm on the sales side, and a level 1 support staff who's been at the company for 1 year will have access when I don't. So it has nothing to do with position or longevity. Sorry, my lineups, I just noticed this, but my lining is a little off. So you as a business, your system administrators are A-OK. Your billing department, they're going to have the necessary access, but you don't need to give all your developers full access to their Magento dev environment or the Magento live environment, especially where they're touching sensitive information like credit card info. Project managers definitely, more often than not, they won't know what to do with it, but they won't need the credentials the same way that your system administrator does. So defining roles, sysadmin level gets certain level credentials, project managers get certain level of credentials, and so forth will really help you in establishing that policy. Assigned unique user IDs. We used to have an issue where when we were investigating it, problems with merchants, they say, hey, my site is taking 10 seconds to load. Why is that? And as a hosting provider, we offer a service where our support staff will actually log into the Magento admin panel and actually take a look at see what the issue could be. Is it inefficiency of coding, third-party extension or module that could be the issue? And the merchant will say, here's my user ID and password. Go ahead, log in, let me know what you find. That's actually one of the biggest risks is when you're sharing that information, especially when you're just emailing it, is detrimental to or a big risk to your company. Also, being able to track changes, even on the server level, being able to track changes that are made is definitely critical because you want to be able to point back to where things were broken or somebody had broken something. And that is pretty hard when you're sharing user IDs and passwords. One of the new things, PCI DSS 3.1, okay, so that is the latest version, requires is two-factor authentication. We at Nexus, we developed a free extension that's only good with Magento 1 right now, but we're working on updating it with Magento 2, is Sentry. It's a two-factor authentication plugin. You can enable it with your Magento admin panel. This essentially, anytime, I don't have my phone on me, but anytime you try and log in to your Magento admin panel, it'll send a alert to your phone. Please confirm that you are the person. You have a registered phone, and it works with Google Authenticator. Anybody use Google Authenticator now? Yep. So you use it on your Gmail. I do too. Or Duo Security, which is another competing product to Google Authenticator. Lock the front door, unlike me when I was a kid. Consider badge entry points. Every time we walk into a door, we key card. And I'm not saying you guys have to do that, but when you know your developers are going to be working on something around the credit card information or the payment process, let's say, just make sure that the room that they're working in, not everybody can just walk right in and look over their shoulder and see what they're working on. It is a requirement for PCI and to, at the very least, have things secured. So if your developer is remote and they're working outside, which maybe it's a nice sunny day, and being from Detroit, we really love doing that. But essentially, you're failing your PCI compliance right then and there. You're not in a secured environment, and anybody can walk right up, grab whatever you're looking at, and run away. So there's a risk for that. It seems excessive, but it really keeps you in the mindset of where are my potential risks, and how am I making sure this information is being secured? And cardholder data being accessed, areas where devices, systems, or hard copies can be accessed is essentially hard drives or actual hardware where information is being housed. And that, obviously, if you're working with a partner, a hosting provider, you're going to want to make sure that they're a secure data center. And more often than not, they are. Same thing goes for POS and paper receipts. If you run a brick and mortar store, don't ever keep your receipts up front, and it's always locked in the back. So on a more technical level, version control systems, when you want to track and monitor changes in your files, setting up a version control is going to be essential. Essentially, you're alerted when changes to your core files are made by any individual. You're able to track those changes. You're able to revert back to whatever changes. So, excuse me, a lot of times developers will make changes, and then the merchant contacts us and said, the site went down, can you check the server? As if it's the server that went down on its own. And then we point back and say, no, here's the change that was made, and here's when the site went down. And then we help merchants actually revert back before the site went down, or before the change was made, really. Our system administrators, they recommend version control and then a file integrity manager system, the alerts, of course, and the version control for reverting back any changes or being able to stage changes in phases. PCI requirement actually asks for 1 year of logs. Version control actually helps to log code through on a specific time period. So 1 year is actual requirement. If you have less than 1 year, you're not secured at the level that you should be processing credit card information. One thing that we've done, or another thing that we've done at Nexus, is Magento administrator users with Alarm Bell. It's a new extension that we released that email notifications when you log into the admin panel, failed login attempts, login user actions that actually create, edit, or delete stuff that maybe you're not aware of. You can enable this pretty easily and be alerted anytime there's a change. And it helps when you're working with a team of developers or multiple companies that are all working together so that when somebody points the finger at somebody else, you guys can at least get notified and help to track back where changes are. How many people actually do fire drills, like test your network for potential risks? And essentially meaning run internal and external network vulnerability scans. Regular scans are a requirement. Quarterly scans are a requirement. Yearly scans are a requirement. And then looking for areas where your network or your server environment could be, you could have false areas or holes in your network. Company security policy. So when you go through all this, and I went through the first 11 ones, and I have to apologize because essentially what I did was I went through the PCI requirement rules. Every time it said, every time you read, you can replace the word habit for requirement. These came straight out of the documentation, and they are what we encourage our Magento merchants to consider. We are required by PCI standards that if we find that a merchant isn't doing one of these 12 practices, that we have to inform them to not do whatever changes they want to make or not do things a certain way. So when you start looking at your security policy and when you're putting things in place, the documentation will come. Essentially, it'll all come together in a nice company-wide document that you can distribute. You can build training programs around, even for the few employees that you may have, or if it's a much larger company, then you can then piece apart and train individual departments. So, and then it'll also help you knowing your responsibilities. Building the diagram is key, like I mentioned earlier. But hopefully this slide's a good summary of some of the things we talked about. You can go to PCIsecuritystandards.org, and I guess the theme is for today that security is in your hands and it's your responsibility. Don't assume that because I am hosted at Nexus or because I'm hosted at Rackspace or GoDaddy or any other hosting provider by any means, that my business is PCI secured. My business is 100% secure because I work with these companies and they told me that they're PCI. Our security standards don't necessarily reach all aspects of your business, and so it really takes an individual, whether you as the CEO take the initiative or you have maybe a more technical or system administrator person that's able to take the initiative to go through and start assessing your security practices. Thanks all for sitting in. Appreciate it.